Looks like Kiara wants to play, and it's exactly what you think it means. Welcome back to Otaku Daikun, Dai here. It's time to continue our lore of Fate Grand Order, progressing through the sub-arc Epic of Remnant. While released as an event rather than a standalone chapter, today's pseudo-singularity, Seraph Deep Sea Cyber Nirvana, nonetheless involves a demon god and is totally worthy of its own video. In fact, it's one of the most convoluted sections of the entire game, and I hope to explain it in a way that lets you see just how epic it really is. Last we left off, we had defeated the demon god Baal, resolving the Shinjuku singularity. Sherlock had warned us about the presence of more escaped demon gods, but before we can track any of them down, we encounter a much bigger problem. It all started when the demon god Zepar, like the other surviving pillars, took refuge in a point in space-time to lie dormant and continue Getia's legacy in their own way. He chose to visit Chaldea's Seraphic's oil rig and hide away inside one of the facility's staff. The victim, or perhaps benefactor, of Zepar's possession happens to be Kiara Sesshouin. In this timeline, she's a humble therapist for her coworkers, which is useful since Seraphic's isn't exactly the most ethical place. At the start of this video series, I mentioned that Chaldea went through many different master candidates in order to obtain someone like Mashu, who was capable of summoning a servant into her own body. The failures of this endeavor were sent to Seraphic's, effectively swept under the rug, so clearly this place is much darker than a mere oil rig. Despite supplying Chaldea with resources, it served to mask some of its more devious activities. What better place for a demon god to hide? By possessing Kiara, Zepar avoided Chaldea's detection, and through her, he aimed to take control of the facility. That's interesting, alright, but surely fans of Fate Extra CCC will find this suspicious. If you play that game, you'll know Kiara is a devious sex-obsessed cult leader who nearly devoured the entire world in her gaping privates. Luckily, on the Fate Grand Order timeline, she lived in a completely different manner, never amounting to such a threat. Even so, Zepar had the ability to observe parallel worlds, and while looking into them, he witnessed a version of Kiara who more closely matches our expectation of her. For this to make any lick of sense, you'll have to be familiar with what happens in Fate Extra CCC, which is in itself one of the most complicated parts of this entire franchise. I have a video entirely dedicated to this obscure game, covering what happens in the story, but for the sake of this video, I'll do my best to give you the Cliff Notes version. Basically, Fate Extra takes place in an alternate timeline, a parallel world where instead of masters competing in the Grail War to reach the root, the planet's mana is actually depleted, leaving mages with no faith in the physical world. Instead, they seek shelter in the Moon Cell, a mysterious supercomputer on the moon. By hacking into the Moon Cell, mages can live in its virtual environment, Seraph, and it's within Seraph that they fight in the Moon Cell Holy Grail War, competing to access the Moon Cell's core. After all, controlling the Moon Cell's core was a power pretty much equal to that of a Holy Grail. In the game, our protagonist Hakuno was a human who had been put into cryosleep until a cure for their illness could be found. When the Moon Cell built its virtual Grail War, it grabbed Hakuno's consciousness and duplicated it as an AI to serve as an NPC, or non-player character. Same thing goes for Sakuramato, an AI put in charge as the school's nurse. In the original Extra game, Hakuno as an AI wound up gaining their own consciousness and joined the Grail War completely unaware that they're just an AI. CCC is basically an alternate plot route to that game, with things getting out of hand thanks to the Kiara we know and love. In that timeline, Kiara was heir to the Shingon Tachikawa Eiten school, a Buddhist sect that viewed sex as the source of all creation. By engaging in fornication, one could reach enlightenment by being one with the entire cosmos. No joke, this is an actual thing. It's only fictional in that Kiara, taking over as the school's head, reformed and expanded its practice through the internet. When she became the school's prophet, she placed herself at the center of her followers' worship. Despite the purpose of this cult being to help humanity reach enlightenment through love, Kiara proved to only be capable of loving herself. She basked in the pleasure of being worshipped, and any quote-unquote love she shared with her followers was twisted, meant to make them even more dependent on her. This didn't end well. The cult, completely obsessed with Kiara, wound up committing mass suicide. Nonetheless, she continued to pursue her pleasure by joining the Moon Cell Grail War, hoping to reach even greater heights. While in Seraph, she contacted Sakuramato and awakened her to her love for Hakuno. This caused Sakura to also become self-aware, and she realized that both herself and Hakuno were in danger of being deleted by the moon cell as anomalies. Her desire to save Hakuno resulted in the creation of BB, a repressed side of Sakura that decides to take control of the moon cell for the sake of her love. She's a surprisingly powerful AI. As a school nurse, she was initially tasked with monitoring the psychological well-being of the war's participants, and BB can use this power for her own purposes uninhibited. To assist in protecting Hakuno, BB created alter egos of herself, fusing aspects of her personality with various goddesses, resulting in servants like Meltryllis and Passionlip. There are others, but since they don't show up in this singularity, I'll leave them out for now. Let's start with Meltryllis. She was born from Sakura's pleasure. As a servant, she is a composite deity made from the Greek goddess Artemis, Leviathan from the Old Testament, and the Hindu goddess Sarasvati. Her main power comes from corrosive nectar that drains her opponent's strength, and her techniques are all based around ballet dancing. She is generally unfeeling, and the pleasure she derived from Sakura came through basking in human suffering. Passionlip, on the other hand, was born from Sakura's love and hate. She consists of the Hindu goddesses Parvati, Durga, and the Scandinavian Valkyrie Brynhildr. She's very much a tragic figure, unable to perceive the actual size of her giant hands. Thus, while she wants to touch and interact with the world, her hands only bring destruction. Specifically, her combat technique is called Trash and Crush. It allows her to compress digital information within Seraph into tiny cubes via the compactor within her chest. While Melt could be thought of as a sadist, Lip is quite the opposite. Her body is incredibly sensitive and has a masochistic tendency to encourage being abused. Throughout the game, BB and Kiara were enemies. Kiara agreed not to interfere with BB as she tried to shelter Hakuno in the moon cell's far side, but by the end of the game, Kiara made her move, absorbing Sakura, BB, Passionlip, and Meltryllis, taking over the moon cell, and using her servant Hans Christian Andersen to transform herself into a demonic presence known as Heaven's Hole. I think you can guess what hole that refers to. She tried to become one with the planet, sexually, but in the game's true end, Hakuno managed to defeat her. Again, Zepar witnessed this super powerful Kiara who had taken control of Seraph, and thought that he could use her power to manifest Seraph into his world. Thus, he linked the relatively harmless Kiara he was possessing in our timeline with that of CCC's. This allowed Zepar to digitize Seraphix into the virtual space of Seraph, which took the form of Kiara's feminine body. I guess you could call that a win, but Kiara wound up being too much for Zepar to handle. You see, while Zepar was able to see Kiara's journey in CCC, she was able to see his memories, specifically those of Solomon's Temple of Time. She watched as countless heroic spirits fought to defeat a genuine demon god, a beast of humanity, and decided that she wanted to experience the same thing. Essentially, she wanted to become a god, to continue to bask in the pleasure of being worshipped, feared, hated, whatever emotions could be directed her way. Specifically, she too wanted to become a beast of humanity like Tiamat and Getia. To accomplish this, Kiara began manipulating the digitized staff of Seraphix, corrupting the men with her womanly charm. Through this, Zepar learned of carnal human pleasure and became addicted to it. Before long, it was Kiara who held total control over him. Just like in CCC, the Seraphix staff formed a cult around Kiara, and that complete obsession caused much of the survivors to kill each other in fits of madness. Eventually, she gained access to the Oil Rigs Planetarium, a vault of sorts for Chaldea's failed experiments. There, she found 128 failed master candidates that she could use. In the extra universe, Seraph was powered by the moon cell, but without that in our world, she had to resort to different measures. She had the master candidates remain sealed in their coffins, while she had them summon waves of heroic spirits. These servants would fight each other to the death under the pretense of a Grail War, and their excess mana would power Seraph. This killed the poor masters, and yet their corpses could still be used to keep summoning servants more and more. Kiara once again basked in the attention she got from servants trying to kill her, and used this chaotic Grail War to develop into a beast of humanity. She repeated this process many times, keeping Seraphix hidden from Chaldea in the year 2030. To protect Seraph and maintain the Grail War, Kiara salvaged the BB, Passionlip, and Meltryllis she had absorbed in CCC, recruiting them to be her sentinels, servants who were subjugated to her will via her essence, Karmaphage. Even so, Passionlip and Meltryllis refused to help Kiara, and as such were punished. Lip was fitted with restraints that forced her to obey, and Melt was scrapped, essentially left for dead. By this point, the moon cell realized the kind of chaos Kiara was causing in another world and dispatched a backup of BB to try and stop her. This backup made an agreement with the one Kiara salvaged, an agreement to take down Kiara together, and so the backup took over the role of managing the Grail War, while the other one went dormant. Sadly, despite wanting to eliminate Kiara, BB was still bound by her order to facilitate the Grail War, thus she could only plan her assault in secret, while Kiara continued to summon more servants each time she ran out. The thing about BB is that she has a twisted personality. She generally has the right intentions and tries to do the right thing for the people she loves, but goes about it in troublesome ways. She doesn't mind playing the bad guy if she thinks it's in someone's best interests. In that regard, she's like the villain who's always on your side. You'll wind up having to oppose her, but oftentimes it's for your own good. Trust me, you'll get used to it. Of course, this Grail War was only a means to an end. While Kiara began to grow into a beast of humanity, she was still bound to Seraph, a virtual space. In order to truly wreak havoc upon the world, she would need to escape that shell. The Seraphic's oil rig was located above the Mariana Trench, the deepest ocean trench on Earth. And Kiara figured she could use this to sink Seraphic's all the way down to the planet's core, digitizing the Earth's layers along the way. There, she could become one with the planet and truly be born as a beast. So, yet again, Kiara wants to screw the planet, if her noble phantasm didn't already make that abundantly clear.
すべての苦痛を招きましょう。この世に人は我一人、この世に星は我一つ。今こそ楽土の土壌とならん。スカーバティ、ヘブンズホール。
Chaldea gets involved when they receive a distress call from Seraphix. The staff there are screaming about becoming digitized, and the signal goes blank. At this point, BB sends Chaldea a live video feed from her infamous BB channel. She tells Chaldea to look for Seraphix in the year 2030, revealing that the oil rig has become a singularity. There's a genuine fear that the crew of the Seraphix will all die once the rig plummets too deep into the trench, so Ritsuka is prepared to ray shift. Normally, one cannot simply ray shift into the future, but since BB is contacting them from the future, she can serve as a pathway of sorts. Ritsuka set off for the singularity, bringing along 3 servants, Nero, Emiya, and Tamamo no Mae. These happen to be the 3 servants you can choose between in the original Fate Extra. We get our first instance of BB being a complete troll, in that she forbids us from bringing along a team of servants. As punishment, she not only sends them all to different locations, but she also somehow winds up swapping them out for different servants. Instead of Nero, Gawain shows up. Instead of Emiya, we get Emiya Alter, and instead of Tamamo, we get Tamamo Cat. Her actions seem questionable, but this entire time, BB truly is on our side. Again, she's just being forced to run the Grail War by Kiara's command, and her strange behavior shows in moments when she's secretly trying to defy Kiara. For one, without a third party like Chaldea intervening in the first place, nobody could truly end this damn Grail War, since the poor Master Corpses will just be forced to summon more and more servants each time. Speaking of those Masters, it's actually pretty significant that Emiya Alter was summoned. He may be quite mysterious, but we can see that he's definitely devoted to defeating evil. His main goal in being here is to free the Master Candidates from their torment. We still don't know much of his backstory, what made him Emiya Alter, but we learn in the Singularity that on his own initial timeline, he was tasked with slaughtering Kiara's depraved cult, and learned that Kiara was the only truly evil one among them. He put an end to Kiara in that timeline, no doubt influencing his cold-hearted demeanor, and it seems he senses similar foul play here on Seraph. Still, when Ritsuka arrives in Seraph, they are alone and defenseless. Taking advantage of this, we are attacked by the Saber Servant Suzuka Gozen. In legend, Suzuka was the princess of a heavenly demon king, sent to Earth to make Japan into an evil country. Instead, Suzuka fell in love with the swordsman Sakanoe no Tamuramaro and joined him in slaying Oni. After years of teamwork, however, she was betrayed by her lover, struck down without explanation. As a heroic spirit, she pursues a master she can love with all of her heart, and does so by adopting a Joshi Kosei persona, that of a youthful Japanese high schooler. In this Grail War, Suzuka never got to meet her master, but she fights for their sake, respecting the fact that they called out to her and trusted her with their dying wish. I feel bad since she's so loyal and cute, but right now she's trying to kill us. Thankfully, we're saved when Meltryllis shows up and becomes one of Ritsuka's servants. While Suzuka has the upper hand, she flees in fear of Melt's life-draining nectar. As if all of this wasn't confusing enough, I'm about to reveal that there's time travel involved with this whole singularity. Turns out, even though we appear to be meeting Meltryllis for the first time, this is technically our second go-through of the Grail War. Bear with me. Originally, Ritsuka arrived in Seraph and found Meltryllis taking shelter in a chapel. There, they became allies, and Melt was so happy to finally have someone to accept her, to hold her hand without being afraid. We fought together, and even made it to the final battle with Kiara, but ultimately lost. Problem was, even though Melt and Lip had both rebelled against Kiara, they were still bound by her essence, her karmaphage, which prevented them from truly defeating Kiara. Instead, Kiara murdered Ritsuka like it was nothing, and clipped Melt's wings by breaking her hands. Things seemed hopeless, but then Melt was all, "You should have gone for the legs," and teams up with Passionlip to pull off something amazing. You see, as Seraph sinks to the bottom of the ocean, traveling upwards in the singularity winds up reversing time. Melt and Lip have a joint noble phantasm called Virgin Laser Palladion, based off the legend of Athena's spear. It involves Lip protecting and launching Melt like a projectile. While they couldn't defeat Kiara, nothing was stopping them from launching Melt up into the air at such a tremendous speed that she wound up traveling back to when Ritsuka first appeared. With the knowledge that they first need to free themselves of Kiara's control before confronting her, Melt plans on saving Ritsuka and making up for their past mistake. Paradoxically, this meant that they were now two Meltryllises at the same time. To prevent Kiara from noticing this, Melt visited her past self at the chapel and explained her predicament. Past Melt declared that even though the future Melt was wounded, she was more valuable to Ritsuka, and for the greater good, past Melt committed suicide, entrusting future Melt to finally put an end to Kiara. So yeah, the Meltryllis that just saved us from Suzuka is already gone through this entire ordeal before. And while she won't say so, she deeply cares for and wants to protect us. We're safe for now, but we can't linger. Meltryllis explains that while we came here to stop the oil rig from sinking, we risk being digitized well before that happens. To avoid this, we have to find a safe haven, and along the way, we encounter Gawain. Obviously, shit's confusing when Gawain claims he came here with Ritsuka from the start instead of Nero, but we put that aside in order to team up. Problem is, Seraph is difficult to navigate, with many areas blocked off. Part of BB's attempt to secretly help us is by selling us keys to get around, in exchange for what she calls sacrament, which is essentially the leftover traces of mana left on the battlefield. She doesn't tell us yet, but she's salvaging this stuff to design ways to limit Kiara's power. As we explore Seraph, we're attacked by Tristan. Now, after what we went through in Camelot, it makes sense to be weary of the Knights of the Round Table. They did terrible things in that singularity, after all. However, they only did so out of an extremely guilt-ridden devotion to the Lion King. Under neutral circumstances, they are far more reasonable. Thus, during the fight, Tristan notices that Melt is handicapped with broken hands, but is yet to inform her own master. He begins to see her as a damsel in distress, someone much like his beloved Isolde. In legend, Tristan was tasked with bringing the Irish maiden Isolde to his uncle, King Mark, for marriage. Along their journey, however, they wound up drinking a magic potion that forced the two to fall madly in love with each other. Tristan was caught in a tragic dilemma, forced to contend with his love for Isolde and his respect for his uncle. In memory of his chivalry, Tristan actually starts to care for Meltryllis, despite his reluctance to help an alter ego. That, and Gawain's presence, encourages Tristan to join our party. He speaks of a different alter ego, Passionlip, who is protecting Seraph's domain of Breast Valley. When we get there, we notice a woman running away from Lip. She calls herself Mabel Macintosh, but is actually just Kiara in disguise. Lip's trash and crush is too powerful for us to handle, so we flee toward a chapel in Seraph's thighs. It's being guarded by Vlad III. I know I spoke of him in my lore of Orléans, but this version is a bit different. Before Apocrypha introduced us to Vlad as the Lancer of Black, we had Extra Vlad, who had a completely different design. While their lore is more or less the same, this Vlad is more deranged and violent, better fitting the title of Dracula. Either way, we kick his ass and enter the chapel to find Emiya Alter. He's not an enemy, but he's not excited to help us either, since he has his own mission to deal with. He does, however, tell us about a terminal behind the altar, which we use to view records of the crew's last moments. The chapel gives us a chance to rest and regain our strength, before moving on to fight Tamamo Cat, whom BB had made into a sentinel. Just as it seems that Tamamo Cat is ready to join us, Emiya Alter shoots her. It seems like a total dick move, but what he actually shot was the part of her spirit origin containing Kiara's karmaphage. Our little edgy Emiya is softer than he looks. Because Seraph is shaped like a person's body, it's possible to get from one side to another by getting the body to flip. We plan on going to Seraph's side and tickling it till it flips over. This helps us escape Passionlip for a time, until we're able to buy from BB a device capable of freeing her from her restraints. With that, we have BB's own personal slave, Robin Hood, bring us back to Seraph's front side. The device BB had sold us is called the Maiden Coaster, which allows Ritsuka to perform a technique that Hakuno used in Fate Extra CCC to essentially dive into a person's exposed emotions, their secret garden. In that game, it helped turn over a new leaf in their enemies, as well as unlock parts of the playable area called the Sakura Labyrinth. For us, it frees servants from their obligation as sentinels, eliminating the karmaphage. We plan to use this on Passionlip, but to initiate the process, Ritsuka must touch her chest. Thankfully, Gawain is more than happy to get rough with the bodacious Lip, restraining her so that Ritsuka can finish the job. We touch her chest and fight her inner self. Lip passes out, but back at the chapel, she agrees to join us. In secret, Meltryllis explains the whole time travel thing to her, and the two sisters agree to work together again. It's sweet and wholesome. Eventually, we make our way to the command room, where Mabel told us there'd be more survivors. There, we find what appears to be the remains of the demon god Zepar, drained of his powers. It's an easy fight, and once he's dead, we find the only remaining survivor. His name is Arnold, and he's kind of a douche. Even so, we take him back to the chapel and learn even more from the records on Seraphix, including the inhumane experiments done on the master candidates. While we rest for the night, Gawain is killed by a secret attack from Mabel. Guess she couldn't resist absorbing his mana. This makes Arnold suspect Melt and Lip, which is dumb since they were outside the chapel all night so as to not freak anyone out. Of course, we never would have suspected Mabel, so we're left with no choice but to continue defeating the remaining sentinels in order to reach the planetarium. So far, Suzuka Gozen's been quite unreasonable, but she finally admits her loyalty to her master. Regardless, we take her down by using the Maiden Coaster on her. We enter her mental landscape and defeat her there. Feeling she has nothing left to fight for, Suzuka tries to commit suicide by leaping into Seraphix's dumping ground. Tamamo Cat, however, convinces Suzuka to join us in order to punish the one who killed her master in the first place. While we gain a new ally, our progress is halted when another remnant of Zepar sprouts from the ground, knocking Meltryllis down into the dumping ground's pit and breaking her legs. After kicking that pillar's ass, Arnold tries to convince Ritsuka to abandon Meltryllis, as we're running out of time before the oil rig reaches the deepest part of the trench. Screw that! No waifu left behind is what I say. Emiya Alter lends us a suspension cable for us to go fetch Meltryllis. By this point, she feels like her journey is over, that she's failed and there's no way Ritsuka would come to rescue her. She underestimates our devotion, and at the bottom we have a sentimental reunion. Sadly, Emiya Alter, like a total prick, cut the suspension cable, leaving us with no way to get out of the dump. He goes off on his own, first to the chapel to murder Mabel and Arnold. His goal is to wipe out all trace of the rig's horrible experiments. He then goes to the planetarium, known in secret as the Celestial Body Simulator, System Animisphere. He destroys the power source of all the coffins so that no more servants can be summoned, but he is shocked to discover that Kiara was behind it all. No wonder he took regular Emiya's place. Kiara was his nemesis in life, and now again in FGO's timeline. To save us from Seraphix's waste disposal, BB actually sends us further down to the Cruel Thenar, Meltryllis' former territory before she tried to betray Kiara. With little time to spare, Meltryllis insists on having Ritsuka use the Maiden Coaster on her. By confronting Melt's emotions directly, we free her from her role as a sentinel, which allows her to help us get back to the chapel. It's clearly suspicious that Mabel and Arnold are no longer there, so we leave Meltryllis to rest her broken limbs and head for the planetarium ourselves. Once inside, we discover BB's studio and fight her off, having no idea that she's secretly an ally. This exposes the planetarium for what it really is, the facility Emiya Alter had just destroyed. At this point, Emiya Alter has been taken over by Kiara, and he insists on killing Ritsuka to eliminate any trace of this corrupt place. But he's outnumbered by our servants Passionlip, Tristan, Tamamo Cat, and Suzuka Gozen. He collapses in a puddle of water, no longer able to fight. Kiara finally takes this opportunity to reveal that she's been Mabel the whole time, watching over Ritsuka's journey for the fun of it. Thus far, we'd blamed all this on Zepar, only to find out that Kiara has long since become the true mastermind. Obviously, we try to stop Kiara from making love to the planet, but find ourselves completely outmatched. In a heartbeat, Kiara wipes out all of our servants and nearly kills us before BB intervenes and rewinds time till just before the fight. She shelters us in an abandoned classroom, located just above the planetarium, and explains that she's completely on our side now that the Grail War is over. She reveals that she's been using the sacrament we've gathered thus far to create tools we can purchase to limit Kiara's libido, evening the odds of a fair fight. Even better, Meltryllis is now recovered enough to join us in the battle. This time, neither she nor Passionlip are bound by Karmaphage, and can truly give their all against Kiara. For just one moment, we make like the Australian government and ban all the fun lewdness, robbing Kiara of her strongest attacks. We gain the advantage, nearly defeating Kiara before she destroys the arena around us and begins floating the remaining distance to the Earth's core. In suspended gravity, we aren't able to give chase, but thankfully Meltryllis was prepared for this bullshit. Last time, she and Lip used Virgin Laser to send her upwards as a form of time travel. Now, however, she has Lip launch her straight down to Kiara. Like a friggin' harpoon, Meltryllis darts through the digitized ocean, crushing Kiara's heart, such that her body will fade before ever reaching the core. Melt explains that while both she and Kiara are beings of pleasure, they differ in that Melt actually learned how to love others instead of herself. Ritsuka taught her that, but Kiara gets greedy and figures that while she's about to die, nothing's stopping her from stealing Melt's body and starting all over again. Her hair turns into demon gods which try to pull Melt in closer, but before they can, Emiya Alter shows up to blast the hair away. With what little strength he had left, he got Tristan's help for a suicide run to rescue Melt. She was prepared to die down there, but thanks to Emiya Alter's cable, she is pulled out by Tristan and released from Kiara's grasp. Consigned to his own death, Emiya Alter watches as Kiara essentially climaxes at the thought of losing. She's not satisfied with the outcome though, and as she vanishes, she considers the merit of what Melt had told her. Perhaps by turning over a new leaf, she can find even more profound pleasure in loving others. This is basically why she can later be summoned by Chaldea. Without that new perspective, I wouldn't let her near me. One thing of note is that the nature of Kiara's beast form is actually that of a pair of twins, a dual nature like yin and yang. Thus, what we really just defeated was one half of a whole. Technically, Kiara was Beast 3R, the right-hand counterpart to what we'll see later as Beast 3L, but that's a story for another time. In the aftermath, all the survivors are brought back to BB's studio. While Melt's spirit origin was too damaged, BB had saved her spirit core for further summoning. She uses her power over the moon cell to register Melt, Lip, as well as herself into the throne of heroes in order to help Ritsuka on later missions. Apparently, the BB who's been helping us all along was a backup of the one watching over the far side of the moon cell. Now that Kiara's defeated, she has no obligation to go back. What sucks is that, while all of this did indeed happen, nobody at Chaldea has any record of it. BB had the whole thing written off as a void phenomenon, which I guess makes it seem to others like nothing ever happened. When Ritsuka asks about Seraphix, Da Vinci says that it was supposedly dismantled years prior. Guess this'll all have to be a secret kept between us and BB. Speaking of which, this event had an encore section. Remember how I said that there were technically two BBs? One was salvaged from Kiara, and the one we met was the BB backup from the moon cell. Well, now that we've destroyed Kiara, the BB she had salvaged, now calling herself BB Go, tries to use what's left of the singularity to imprison humanity. We complete a few more tasks, kick her ass, and that's that. Don't think too hard about it. It's just a silly excuse to extend the event a bit further. Again, I consider this by far to be the least accessible plot arc in the entire game. Even so, it's got a lot of cool parts that I hope you can appreciate more now. The next video will continue with the Epic of Remnant proper with Agartha. Look forward to it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this channel, help me beat the algorithm by liking, commenting, and sharing the video, subscribing to Otaku Daikun, and, most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of my anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content. If you want to support me directly, there are now 3 ways that all provide the same benefits. You can click join here on YouTube, or join Patreon or Subscribestar for access to exclusive vids and early access. As always, celebrate your fandom.